Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about how, like tactically, how we go about building out a training plan. Rob Britton
Yep.
was on the podcast, and Rob was talking about his average power is so low. Like even winning Badlands, I think his average power was south of 190 watts for the entire event, which
sounds right.
for most trained riders, that's a zone 2 ride.
Yeah.
How do we go about thinking around volume and intensity distribution in a training plan for one of these guys?
So I would still periodize the training plan per normal periodization of what we want as an outcome. In terms of volume is...
Maybe just to jump in there, John, even clarify that. Like, what are we talking about normal periodization? Are you an advocate of reverse periodized plan, standards 3 weeks each, building on the next, and then kind of a decompression week?
Yeah, so I would, depending on the athlete, but it would say be a 3+1, so 3 weeks on, 1 off, or maybe 4-1-1, depending what that athlete can handle from a load perspective, and then build up from, like if we go really traditional, from like your base period, your pre-preparation, like medium intensity, high intensity, taper and go, and sometimes I do play around where I mix sort of some blocks up and some phases and microcycles up, but essentially I would block periodize it correctly going into the event. And again, whether an athlete can handle 3+1 or 4+1, it's completely based on them. But I wouldn't mainly go reverse periodization. 1 or 2 cases I have, but that's, for someone just entering, the answer would be no.
Okay.
Put it that way. A strong focus that I do have for these ultra events is I put a lot of focus on strength, obviously off the bike, and then also your neuromuscular efforts and your metabolic efforts on the bike. For me, that's a really important part, because the minute fatigue kicks in, which it does, and you can't turn a higher cadence or a higher power, you need to then revert, which if you watch cadence of these ultra cyclists, the cadence always goes lower and lower and lower as fatigue sets in and the sessions go harder. There'll be a point where you're not running on watts, you're running on Newton meters of torque. And when that fatigue kicks in, you need to revert to torque to keep going. And obviously with torque, your power is lower, but your torque is higher, and you're still producing power or strength to go forward on the bike. And that's something I'm a strong advocate of.
And do you start building that in immediately with someone as soon as they come in the door with you?
Yeah, 100%, especially for an ultra site-based or an ultra athlete. And I do revisit that during our whole training phase going in.
And that's off the bike, gym work, and on the bike. All
Yes.
skills, strengthies, as Alan Davis would call them.
Yeah, correct, 100%.
And when we think about a normal Joe Friel style periodization system like this, we're typically cycling from endurance work into adding a bit of tempo work in one phase, coming into the next phase, we're adding a bit of threshold into VO2 and sprint. But do we still is there a role for sprint type training in this? Because we're looking at some of these files I've seen, people aren't really getting north of 800 watts all too often.
Sure. But so the answer is yes, but just because you don't do it during the event, it doesn't mean that you don't do it in training, because essentially that stimulus, you want to increase your VO2. You increase your VO2, your threshold can improve, your metabolic phase improves. So you want to improve as an athlete, essentially going forward from a physiological point, regardless of whether you're going to be doing 40-20 type simulation in that endurance event.
So you're looking at working above that to pull it up, kind of.
Correct. So you still want to improve your peak power, because then everything underneath it improves.
Okay, very interesting. And someone that's coming in, I suppose I'm trying to think as we're chatting about the differences between the clients you're working at in Bora who have all day to ride their bike versus average Joe coming in. And one of the things that we touched on a couple of times is we can't just ride our bike all day. I wake up this morning, I want to go ride my bike, but we do a podcast and I have another couple of emails to get back to. I'll ride my bike, I'll come back, I have more work to do. And that's the reality for most of us. So fatigue is a big issue, because I suppose the outcome of a session we're trying to get is to get faster on the bike, not to tick a box and just say we've done a session. So it's that recovery gives us that space to get the adaptation. How do you think about feedback mechanisms?
So feedback comes in many forms. One being what you see in a data file, obviously. From an athlete, you can see if their session was done well within the ranges, etc., that you want. For myself personally, I still believe very much in that human communication in terms of feedback, where it's like a simple message is, hey, how'd you feel? And then from an external side, I use the submaximal fatigue test, which is every sort of 7 to 10 days. And that tracks everything. Essentially, it tracks progression, whether you are or aren't progressing with your specific athlete. And that to me is when you correlate kind of all of those together, you get a full picture of where the athlete actually is.
What's the submaximal fatigue test?
It started off as Lambert's submaximal fatigue test. As a company, we sort of took that data and just sort of fine-tuned it a little bit. So it's a 3-minute test at a specific power range that you would prescribe to that athlete. So hypothetically, it's anything from threshold to 110% of threshold as a power value. And they would perform that 3-minute at that specific power, as I said, every sort of 7 to 10 days, depending where they are, maybe in a block of racing, if it allows it or not. Then you would move it up. Once the athlete has completed that, there's a very short questionnaire, which involves RPE value for the 3 minutes, your time to exertion, and then other external factors like sleep, mood, wellness, tracks your weight, etc. We get that back as correlated data, and then we track that. And that can track whether an athlete is progressing. So is our stimulus correct between intensity, as an example, and recovery, or are we going in the opposite direction where the athlete is fatigued and we need to change training, or is the stimulus not correct and he's plateaued or stagnated? And that is, when done correctly, reporting from the athlete, it's almost bulletproof. The other benefit is that if they are kind of lying on it, and you can pick up bullshit, to be honest, and make sure that it's, and you say to them, hey, like these factors and metrics aren't kind of correlating. Let's make some changes.
Can this be a field test, or do you need them in the lab doing lactates during it as well? Like, what's the protocol for it?
No, it's outside. So they do it kind of any day. So as an example, if I give it to you and you have a 2-hour recovery ride, or even if you have intervals, you would do that within the first sort of 10 minutes of your ride and then go and do the rest of your training for the day.
Very interesting. I hadn't heard of it before. And is there enough time? So it's every 7 to 10 days. You prescribe a training block, 10 days. I do a submaximum fatigue test 10 days later. Is there enough time for my body to absorb that training and make an adaptation that's noticeable in the data?
Yes, you typically get really good data straight away from that.
Is this standard in World Tour at the moment, or is this something you guys are kind of pioneering?
It's not standard. We had introduced it. Obviously, myself and my business partner, Jarin Swat, were at UAE together, and we had introduced it there. And we had introduced it as a company with our athletes, with a specific kind of category of athletes. And we had obviously then brought it over for monitoring there, and I've just carried it over to Bora with my specific group of athletes that I use now, that I work with now.
It's a great idea, because most of us intuitively know inside, you're starting a 20-minute threshold effort. Inside 2-3 minutes, you have a really good idea how you feel. You have a really good idea how the rest of that session is going to go. Yeah. Like I've started a threshold effort after a long day, and it's like you get on it, and within 2-3 minutes, heart rate's not where it should, RPE is not where it should, and you're like, I'm going to suffer so bad for the next 20 minutes.
Correct. Yeah, correct. And what we ask is, obviously, as they do the 3 minutes, they fill that sort of very short questionnaire out straight away. So as soon as they do it, I get that feedback straight away. And I would look at it, and if things really aren't good, I would make contact with that athlete straight away and say, like, look, you abort the session, or like if it's fine, I don't report to them straight away, and they carry on going.
Feedback is an interesting one, because feedback is our the athlete's ability to communicate feedback too. And some people with different personalities are good and bad at feedback. Have you played around with introducing personality tests?
Yes, not really a test in itself. I try adapt myself to that athlete's personality instead of them kind of always adapting to myself. Like you need to find a happy medium. But for me, if you get an athlete that's a little bit on the spectrum side versus an athlete that kind of is normal, I kind of have two very different approaches when I deal with each athlete. So that kind of like, I sometimes feel I have a really good potential to have multiple split personalities. I could be a great serial killer, I think. But yeah, that's, I know some teams and that are doing that and introducing that slowly now. I haven't personally ever done one with an athlete or got one to do it. I just kind of do it on feeling and try adapt accordingly.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I know a lot of companies are starting, and the links between top performers, it doesn't necessarily have to be sport. I've noticed a lot speaking on the podcast to people who are CEOs of big companies, and the amount of common traits they have with Valtteri Bottas, who drives an F1 car, with Greg LeMond, multiple Tour de France champion. High performance is a thread that links all these people together, and personality tests are definitely creeping into corporate world more and more.
Yeah. Like, someone says to me, oh, why do you, coach this age group athlete? And for me, sometimes an age group athlete is the easiest athlete to coach, especially if he runs a really high-end company. Like if I coach, there's a CFO that I coach, how he approaches work is how he approaches his training, and he's the easiest guy to coach. I ask him to do something, it's done. The feedback is there. It's bulletproof, and you kind of think, I wish that some of the professional athletes at Pro Conti or amateur or, World Tour level are as professional as what this guy does. So that when you speak to him is like, well, that's what my life is like. That's what I just transfer straight over to my training. So what you say is 100% correct.
And is that, let's maybe unpack that idea of professionalism. Like what makes him so professional? And is that a trait that you can see repeated among top performers? Is it the same reason Roglic is successful? Is it the same reason Vlasov is successful? What is that trait that we call professionalism?
I would say how I like to look at it, and it's also quite a wide road, but it is the attention to detail. It's a very structured attention to detail. Someone has asked me, oh, who's the most professional person you've ever worked with as an athlete? And I didn't personally coach him, but I worked with him closely. I ended up doing a lot of races with him and stuff when I was at UAE, and that was Alexander Kristoff. He was probably the most professional athlete I've ever seen. And yes, don't get me wrong, Tadej winning the Tour is super professional. Roglic has been incredible since he's come to Bora. But they all carry that same trait where, yes, they're fun and they laugh and they make good jokes and stuff like that. But when it comes to their trade, it is just super focused, super professional. Their attention to detail is incredible. And I just feel that is what makes them. Like you walk in their room and their bag is packed, it's clean, where you walk in some athletes' riders' rooms and it's like, mate, you've got to flush a toilet. It's like, so when you look at it that side, I do feel that then follows over into the actual racing on the bike.
Roadman, let me take a second to talk to you about Whoop. It's a wearable health and fitness coach that provides you with feedback and actionable insights into your sleep, recovery, training, stress, and overall health. It gives you insight into what's going on with your body. As cyclists, we love marginal gains. Whoop lets me chase those marginal gains. I can focus on 1% improvements in sleep, recovery, and training. But Whoop isn't just about training, it's about overall health. And your health underpins everything you do in your life. And Whoop helps you understand and proactively improve it through 24/7 monitoring. And that positively impacts all areas of your life. If you go to join.whoop.com/roadman, you're going to get a free month's Whoop membership on me. I promise you won't regret it. The details are in the description below.